functioning organisations. And I think we know that really from our own personal experiences of work. You know, we know that from our own experiences that having a good line manager makes a big difference to us, and having a bad line manager is really mental for us. I think we know it from a kind of HR perspective. In some of the organisations I've worked with, the HR teams are generally aware of bad pockets of line management practice and the impact that has, both in terms of performance and in terms of having to deal with kind of grievances. But there's also a lot of evidence that line management makes a big difference to organisational outcomes, and also makes a difference to kind of country level GDP. I'll talk about that evidence in a moment. Second point, I think, is we're often not clear about what we expect from our line managers. You know, we tend to have lots of policies and procedures to follow, and we tend to ask them to sort of engage and deliver a lot of initiatives. But you know, what really matters to us, what's really a priority in that role, we're not clear about really what we expect. Promotion into line management is still, I think, in a number of places, often based on technical skills. The idea that if you're good at what you do, you tend to get promoted. You have a particular capability to lead people, or even an interest in it. Preparation and support for the role is often lacking. I think the last figures I looked at showed that about a third of organisations invest in training their managers, and that particular report didn't really say anything about the content of management training, its quality, or the timeliness. So when people are receiving input and support, it's a critical factor. Line managers play a number of roles. I mean, the line management role is very complex. Where line managers often asked to be sort of counsellors, mentors, planners, executives. So a whole number of roles, which require in many ways quite different, varied communication skills. So one of the things that I think is perhaps important to say that we'll return to later is it's really kind of clear that effective communication is essential to the effective performance of the role. I'll now turn on to the third slide, which is the impact of effective line management organisational outcomes. So line management is associated with a wide range of organisational outcomes, and it is in a particularly diverse range. This particular statement from research for NHS employers for the Centre for Evidence-Based Management. The wide range of outcomes included things like strategy development and implementation, innovation, employee satisfaction, and absenteeism. It also mentioned the important role of line managers in conflict management, the impact that has on reducing turnover rates, and the importance of line managers in sort of encouraging their staff to see change initiatives positively, and also an impact on the learning climate within organisations. So a real wide range of outcomes. So the research also identified 5 key aspects of line management that help facilitate those organisational outcomes. There's social cohesion, youth supervisory support, team empowerment, psychological group goals. So social cohesion is really about a sense of belonging to a group, attraction to a group, identification with it, the closeness of kind of team members in that group, and whether they sort of care and look after each other is really important at the moment. The supervisory support is really about whether line managers help the individuals they manage in times of need, whether they offer kind of praise and recognition for good work. Team empowerment is really about provision of feedback, constructive feedback, about enabling individuals to have a kind of sense of autonomy in their role, and kind of enabling individuals to feel that they make a difference to the group or team they're part of. Psychological safety is really kind of creating that climate where people feel free to share ideas, they have a belief in the good intentions of others, They don't feel like in sharing ideas they'll be rejected or sort of treated unfairly in any way. The final thing is group goals. So this kind of sense of having a group objective enables people to kind of plan together and cooperate together. So those kind of 5 key ways in which line managers support the achievement of organisational outcomes. So now we're looking at the slide entitled the impact of effective management. This is really looking at the impact of management practice at a macro level. This was work done by Nick Bloom at Stanford University, and Van Ringen, Professor of Economics at MIT. And what they did was they built a survey of kind of management practice based around 3 areas where they felt there was consensus around what best practice looked like. And those areas were performance monitoring, so how performance is monitored and tracked, target setting, which is self-explanatory, and then the third point around how talent is identified and developed. So they built this survey on based around those 3 areas of management practice. They did the research with 10,000 organisations across 20 countries, and they came to the kind of conclusion that cross-country variation in GDP, so a country's kind of economic performance, was attributable to management practice. There's kind of a huge amount of variation accounted for by management practice. And perhaps one of the kind of interesting things about the research is it actually excluded a whole range of things like innovation, leadership, and strategy. If you think back to some of the previous slides, we showed that effective line management has an impact on strategy development, innovation, and those kind of outcomes. So potentially this is actually underestimate the impact of management on performance. So we, IES, have done our own kind of research around line management, and what we did was look at what does good line management look like from a direct report perspective. And we identified these 5 key things: so building relationships and trust, open and free discussion, strategic direction, performance feedback, and a developmental focus. And I think perhaps the thing to say is that these aspects from a direct report perspective map quite closely onto the types of line management behaviour that seem to impact organisational performance. So for relationships and trust, you could read across to social cohesion, psychological safety, we talked about earlier. And for strategic direction, you could read that into sort of group goals, which then was one of the things that ways in which line management performance impacts on organisation outcomes. So in a way, there's a kind of win-win. If line managers are showcasing these behaviours, then they will be meeting direct reports needs as well as achieving organisational outcomes. So the main challenge really around line management, I think, is the knowledge practice gap. We know quite a lot about what line management looks like, but we seem to struggle in many cases to translate that into practice. So I'm now moved on to a slide which says a few thoughts on the effect of COVID-19 on communication. So, earlier on we said that, I said that communication is an essential part of the role. So how is communication changing in COVID-19? Well, I think that communication is becoming more difficult and also different during COVID-19. Much of the management is virtual, and communication virtually is different. It's occurring across a backdrop of enormous uncertainty. There's much that's not known and changes frequently. There are a lot of difficult messages that are having to be given around furloughs and redundancies. And the nature of conversations is probably very different. So there's a greater focus on people's health and well-being perhaps than there would be in normal times. burden of communication is higher for my managers, or should be higher in a way. So the physical distance and absence of sort of parting encounters that we come across in the office means that, you know, frequent scheduled conversations are needed to retain the kind of social glue of teams and organisations. I think there's also probably a greater likelihood of communication mishaps, you know, greater chances of misinterpretation due to people's anxiety, perhaps a less ability to clarify key messages. There's also a great opportunity kind of for feelings of exclusion. When the conversations are happening that they're not part of, they should be part of. And I think sort of, if you look at that communication backdrop, I think it kind of emphasises the importance of trust, and perhaps managers that have managed to build a kind of bank of trust with their teams and employees will be kind of faring better in this period than others who haven't managed to do that. But then there's also, we'll talk about in a moment, particular kind of actions that managers can take to build trust if they're, for example, managing someone for the first time, or perhaps having built trust as well as they could to a point. So now moving on to the slide which says what makes for an effective virtual manager. So I've taken this for some research that was conducted by Ruffy Park on what makes an effective virtual manager about 17 years ago, and it highlighted that virtual management was similar in some ways to normal management, was also very different. It requires a different level of skill, micro skills. So identified that more frequent and regular communications were needed. And I think this is borne out by our IES Home Workers and Wellbeing Survey, which is demonstrating that employees who receive more frequent communication from the line manager in terms of organisational commitment and satisfaction. The virtual manager requires kind of excellent listening skills and the ability to kind of spot underlying meaning, process factors in conversations, and to be able to test out meaning by summarising and reflecting what they think they've heard. So it's a much more of a listening conversation, I think, than perhaps more of a talking one. And I know that some organisations I've worked with sort of struggle with that if their kind of managers are generally more comfortable talking than listening. And clarity of communications and expectations. So whilst that's not, you know, important in normal circumstances, there's a need for, you know, greater kind of precision and much more importance on being clear about what we need people to do in this kind of time, in this virtual context. And then the other thing that they're very good at doing is initiating and encouraging actions that build and sustain trust. And we'll talk about some of those actions in a moment.
Dan, just quickly, yeah. We've had a message saying that people are struggling to the quality of the presentation, the speech. They're not hearing you very well.
Okay. Well, I'll try to talk up.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
That's all right. So one of the things that we know from previous research, so in this annual management agenda that I led in 2017, more than half of managers felt that the managers in their organisation weren't well equipped to manage virtually. So there's probably a lot of work to be done in this area. So moving on to some essential trust actions. So this model was again taken from my time at Ruffy, and I think there's transactional elements to this. So being sort of agreeing what you will do and then doing it, and enabling people to understand what you want and enabling them to deliver is a key sort of transactional element of building trust. But there are also kind of more relationship elements, so kind of being personal and vulnerable, being open about mistakes, as well as kind of appreciating others also. So it includes both kind of transactional and more relationship elements. And these illustrate some of the ways in which managers can build trust. So moving on now to the slide which says, is line management different now? And leaving aside the kind of the virtual management which we've talked about, I would argue that in many ways the key tensions and dilemmas within the line management relationship are still there, but actually they're made more kind of salient or exacerbated by the current situation. We also know that managers might be struggling more with remote working or in some ways than non-managers. So in the IES Homework and Wellbeing Survey, managers rated their job satisfaction and work-life balance worse than non-managers. So perhaps relating to what Emma was saying earlier about managers having to work longer hours in this period, but perhaps also reflecting different ways of managing staff. So if we think about some of the sort of key dilemmas that I think are inherent in the management relationship and that are made more salient in the current circumstances. The first one is really the control trust dilemma. So this is really about the ability of managers to manage by outputs rather than inputs. And the degree of trust and willingness of organisations to allow them to do so. So they're kind of already reports in the media about multinational organisations using technology to monitor virtual workers, to monitor their kind of productivity, which can sort of damage trust. But we know that employees generally experience kind of better well-being and mental health in jobs where they're able to operate with a degree of a kind of autonomy and freedom of expression. I guess it's not clear that kind of all managers are really equipped to be able to operate in this way, and whether if they're not able to manage in this way, what the impact on them would be and their staff of micromanaging. But in a way, the sort of COVID-19 situation also provides an opportunity for managers and also HR to learn to do things differently, to learn to, in this kind of crucible of experience, to learn to kind of manage by outputs more than by inputs. The second sort of key dilemma is this dilemma around kind of keeping the business going versus attending to staff needs. So managers in this period have been faced with managing the logistics of keeping the business going whilst meeting staff needs for flexibility, which are likely to be both complex and vary over time. And one of the things that I think has been interesting has been around the messages around kind of productivity in this period. So when we started, I think there were lots of messages from senior managers saying, well, we're just going to carry on as normal. But staff were kind of, actually that really wasn't kind of possible for them. Managers were caught in the middle of that. Managers there and with HR have kind of a real important role to play in making sure that kind of messages are consistent and also that there's a kind of happy medium reached with kind of productivity commitments. And I think I've seen those messages change over time, and it's sort of changed from we'll carry on as normal to everyone be as productive as they can be, but look after your well-being, which is a kind of welcome change. The third dilemma I think is interesting is this effectiveness and innovation dilemma. So we need to, in the COVID-19 period, innovate, work in new ways, find solutions to new problems, potentially develop new business revenues. And line managers are kind of key to innovation, but they don't spend as much time in that kind of that third bubble, the innovation bubble, as they would like to in normal times. So they may not have developed the skills necessary to kind of innovate and create that sense of psychological safety within their teams, which supports innovation. I guess that challenge around innovating is also heightened because in this period of high anxiety, we as human beings are not generally at our most creative or innovative in times of high levels of stress. So I think you know, HR has a role to play here in kind of helping line managers facilitate conversations with their staff in ways that support innovation, and also help managers to kind of feel to look after their own well-being, so they can create those environments for their teams. So I'm now moving on to the slide which says determinants of employee well-being. So, you know, employee well-being is really high on the agenda right now, and rightly so. And I think it's useful that managers should have some sort of framework in their head of what the key factors are that influence their staff's well-being. And this is one with 9 factors, which I think is really useful, because if you look at actually any one of these boxes, you can see that our well-being, our staff's well-being, is likely to be affected quite severely by the COVID-19 situation. So, for example, environmental clarity, absence of job insecurity, is supportive for well-being. But there was some recent work done by Zuna which suggested that 44% of UK workers feel that their jobs are under immediate threat, and also that 54% of furloughed workers are worried about their job prospects. So there's a clear risk to well-being there, but there are also risks to well-being in each of the other boxes. So if you look at work demands versus resources, the match of those two is very important. You think about people's resources at the moment, they're probably depleted with the kind of the difficulties of the current situation, whether it's anxiety about the virus itself, or whether it's having to manage work and childcare. I suppose the other flip side is that if managers have an idea that these are the 9 key things that impact employee well-being, they'll also be able to think about what levers and what influence they can have over individuals' well-being. For example, an opportunity for personal control, this is about autonomy and participation in decision making. You know, can managers actually find ways to involve their employees more in decisions? Quality of social interactions on the right middle side, whether, you know, whether managers can do more to kind of build social cohesion within their teams. So I'm now moving on to the slide which is the job characteristics model, what managers need to know. So we know there is a kind of huge impact on well-being from job design, the way in which jobs and work are designed. And I think it's, you know, helpful if managers have an idea about what the different elements of job design are, and enables them to think about, well, actually, how could I alter the way in which my staff's work is done, enhance well-being. And on the left-hand side of this slide, I've highlighted some of the model elements. So skill variety, giving people the opportunity to use a variety of skills in their work. Task identity, for individuals to be able to identify with the work they do as a whole, either as an individual or group. So is there like a key outcome that can represent their efforts? Task significance, so being able to identify with a bigger purpose. I think that's probably a really important one now, right? About how people can feeling of meaning in their work, how they can feel connected to a larger purpose in time is really, really important for resilience. Autonomy and task feedback. So, and then on the right-hand side, I've put down some practical implications. You know, so what can managers think about in design? So things like delegating tasks to the lowest possible level can give that kind of sense of responsibility, empowerment, and also kind of connecting people to outcomes is another way in which you know, connecting people, helping people understand how what they do makes a difference, making people kind of well. So I'm now moving on to the slide that says designing new models of work, time, location, dependency. I think, as Emma referenced in the beginning, I think we are going to see more people want to work And obviously organisations will need to balance organisational demands, customer service demands, and people's needs for flexibility. And there's also quite a lot of talk about organisations using more flexible ways of working to reduce costs of space, for example. So I think it's worth managers have an idea of what work kind of time and location dependent, and what types of work can be done irrespective of time or irrespective of location. And to try to, this is a piece of work that was done by my colleague Steve Bevan when he was at the Work Foundation. Essentially, what it can be used to do is kind of map your current work, either within a kind of team, department, or organisation, against these two dimensions, and see both how flexible work is at the moment, and also think about, well, how flexible could it be in the future. I think this could be a useful exercise to try and understand what the opportunities are for flexible working as more people demand it, and then there seem to be advantages from reducing the cost of office space. So, mental health is a big concern at the moment, and kind of rightly so, and managers have a key role to play. This is taken from a sort of guidance for line managers from according to like the IGLU framework developed by Affinity Health at Work, and it's just quite a useful guide for managers to think about how can they sort of support mental health of staff in this time and afterwards. So that's something that perhaps is useful to have. And then kind of, I suppose, just to sort of close, look into the near kind of future, really. It's actually kind of now and then into the near future. I think this issue of like equipping managers to manage virtually is going to be an increasing issue, because we're going to have more people working remotely, and it's going to be more important that managers are equipped with those kind of micro communication skills to be able to kind of engage and manage people who work remotely. I think there is this potential opportunity, I think, with kind of helping managers to think about how jobs are designed and how that can support well-being. Think about the work that they manage and how that can be done more flexibly in the future. There's obviously key issues around kind of supporting managers to spot health and mental health issues, and I think that was the case before, but I think it will increase given not just the mental health issues during the crisis, but afterwards as well, when there's talk about staff in frontline services from experiencing PTSD, and then facilitating safe and healthy return to work. So that this is, I think this is both about making sure that workplace adjustments are in place and flexibility is afforded to those who are returning to the workplace, but also about making sure that people stay connected when some people are kind of in the workplace and some people will still remain at home and shielding for health reasons. And I guess the final thought really is that just to kind of remember that those line managers are kind of people first. Line managers are often maligned for lots of things, and they can often be the people that are responsible for kind of change programs not working, etc. But I think we should always bear in mind the complexity of the role and the challenges they face. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand back to Emma now. Q&A. I hope that's useful.
Oh, hi there. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear me now. So thank you very much, Dan. In terms of looking at this, I'll come back to you with some observations that I just made. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So I just wanted to take an opportunity to highlight that there are things that we can help you with in relation to this. And in terms of, we have a wellbeing audit tool that we've got, and I'm going to send details out to everyone in relation to this afterwards. But we also have, if you did want to have support from someone like Dan or Ed or any of other subject matter experts, then you've got benefits that you can use in terms of things like critical friend support and internal support for teams as well. And before I open up the Q&A, actually, I just wanted to ask Dan what you think the three key takeaway points are from this.
Yeah, I think it's a bit similar to where we ended up, really. I mean, I think we are going to see a new normal develop. I think we are going to see over a period of time much greater demands for kind of flexible working, and organisations are talking about wanting to reduce their office space. I think there's that challenge of how do we do work in the best way when we're working more flexibly. At the moment, we've had a situation where some people work remotely some of the time, but most people work in workplaces or office spaces. And we've had this sudden change into where most people are kind of remote working without any real kind of preparation. But I think what it does pose is a load of questions then about, well, how do you then in future get the best out of kind of remote working, but also at the same time don't lose the kind of benefits you get from being in an office space, that kind of innovation and social cohesion that develops from sharing the same space. That's one thing. I think the second thing is really around this. I think there is a big thing with kind of job design and managers, and there is so much that support kind of health and well-being with good job design. But I think managers are generally kind of unaware of these kind of job design elements. That's that kind of second thing, really. And the third thing really is around, this continuing need, I think, for managers to be able to hold useful conversations with their staff, to know their staff, to understand when there are kind of health and well-being issues emerging. And I think that's only going to kind of exacerbate, really, or grow greater over time.
Okay, thank you.
I think there's three things.
Yeah, I think that reflects a lot of what I'm hearing from some of the members as well. So I know we have got members that have been already looking at how they can create roles